So we are 4 months away from DC hard launching its cinematic universe, and in today's video I wanted to go over 10 storylines I'd like to see play out in this new DC universe. These are all storylines that I'm a big fan of, and I tried to pick one for each major character in the Justice League, as well as a couple others. Now, these aren't in chronological order of where I'd want to see them play out in the timeline. Some of these I'd want to see done as soon as possible, and some of them would need some build up to get the characters in the right places. With all that out of the way, let's just jump right into 10 storylines I want to see in the DCU. So first, let's start by talking about one of the most famous Batman stories of all time, Batman Under the Red Hood. Before I go any further, I will say that I will be going over spoilers for this story. I'm guessing if you're watching, you already know what makes this story so iconic, but if not, I recommend you go check out the Under the Red Hood animated movie. In short, Batman needed a new sidekick following the departure of Dick Grayson, and eventually Jason Todd would take over as the second Robin. Jason was raised quite differently from Dick, however, growing up in a very abusive home. Because of this, he struggled a lot controlling his anger and impulse, something that would eventually lead to his demise. One night, Jason left the country without warning, seeking a distress call from who he believed to be his mother. However, when he realized what had happened, it was already too late. It turned out that Jason's mom was actually contacting him, but that she was also working with the Joker. The Joker ended up capturing Jason and mercilessly beat him with a crowbar. When he finished, he left Jason and his mother in a warehouse rigged with explosives, and while Batman tried to save them, he didn't get there in time. This was the Death in the Family storyline, and it's one of the most infamous stories in DC Comics history. This isn't the story I want to see adapted though, I'm just giving necessary background information. The story I want to see adapted is actually Under the Red Hood. This story has been adapted a number of times, whether it was the animated film, the Arkham games, or I guess you could say Titans. Red Hood is known to be a very popular character in the Batman mythos, and for good reason. Basically, Batman begins encountering a vigilante wearing a red bat symbol and a red mask. This vigilante seemingly knows every move Batman makes before he makes it. He knows his fighting style, what strategies he's going to come up with, and it just seems like whatever Batman does, the Red Hood is a step or two ahead. It turns out that the Red Hood is actually a resurrected Jason Todd, back to get revenge on the criminal underworld of Gotham, and also to get revenge on Batman for never finishing the job of killing the Joker. This story is absolutely legendary, and I honestly can't believe it hasn't been adapted to live action yet. Yeah, I said it hasn't. It was teased in the Snyderverse, but we never got to see it, and with James Gunn confirming the Bat family will be heavily featured in his version of Batman, I really want to see this storyline unfold. We already know that the fourth Robin, Damian Wayne, is going to be featured in the first DCU Batman film, The Brave and the Bold. Because of this, we can assume that Dick Grayson was already Robin and is now Nightwing, Jason is dead, and Tim is either Robin right before the movie or just never existed. I think the first film will focus on Batman and Damian battling Talia and the League of Assassins, but I really do think the sequel should focus on adapting the Red Hood storyline. It's likely that Batman will still be recovering from the death of Jason in some way by the time Brave and the Bold comes around, and I've actually talked in a couple of videos about how I believe Talia's shocking reveal of Bruce having a son is the only way Bruce would ever take on a Robin following the death of Jason. I've said it a bunch of times, I'll say it again. I don't think that they should cut Tim Drake from the timeline, but story-wise that probably would make more sense. Regardless, seeing Bruce heal from Jason in the first film just for him to come back with a vengeance against the Bat family in the sequel, well, I think it would make for a really cool movie. Fans of DC have been wanting to see this story in live action for a while, and I think it's well overdue for an adaptation. So next up, let's talk about Superman Brainiac. This was a 2008 storyline written by Jeff Johns and featured Brainiac as the main antagonist. This story really tries to establish Brainiac as a massive threat, with the reveal that all the past encounters Superman had with Brainiac were merely just drone extensions of him, and now the true Brainiac has arrived. Brainiac's main goal is to consume knowledge. It's pretty much what he's programmed to do, and for a long time up until this story, he would even use technology to shrink cities and put them in bottles aboard his ship. Even the Kryptonian city of Condor was no match for Brainiac, as it was taken by force by him. Brainiac likes to rid the universe of civilizations, keeping the last remaining pieces of them to himself so that no one can possess the knowledge of them that he does, which is one of the motivations for why he comes to Earth in the first place. He already has the bottle city of Condor, but there are other Kryptonians that still exist in the universe. I do like this storyline a lot, but the main reason I put it on here is because in general, I would just like to see more of Brainiac. He's a great Superman villain and has yet to be featured as the main villain in a Superman film. Pretty much every iteration of Superman has featured Lex Luthor or General Zod as the main villain of the film, with the new movie being no exception as well. I think it would be nice to finally see Brainiac on the big screen, and when I think of a force that can actually match Superman, I tend to think Brainiac. He's an AI that's very capable of going toe-to-toe with Superman, and I would love to see that in either a Superman or a Justice League movie in the future. But preferably Superman, because I've always preferred him as more of a Superman villain anyway. So, Wonder Woman was an interesting character to include on this list because I feel like Wonder Woman doesn't really have a definitive story or villain that immediately pops in my head. For Batman and Superman, there's quite a few stories to look to, but not so much for Wonder Woman. There is one villain that stands out among the rest for me though, and that is Cersei. I feel like if they ever put Wonder Woman on the big screen again, Cersei should be the main villain. She's tied very heavily into Wonder Woman's mythological side and actually is involved in a major storyline from the late 80s called War of the Gods. In this story, Cersei attempts to cause mass conflicts across multiple pantheons of gods: Greek, Roman, Norse, and more. Her goal is to cause all the gods to destroy each other and just overall cause chaos. I've said a couple times that I would like to see a Wonder Woman animated series in this DC universe, but I think this story would actually be well suited for a live action movie. I feel like the story is big scale enough to fit the big screen, and I think by the time a Wonder Woman movie comes out, they're going to want to go with a high stakes storyline to get people in the seats. So have Cersei manipulate the gods into fighting each other and have Wonder Woman come in and save the day. Cersei also needs redemption from her arc in Creature Commandos because she kind of just got bitched the entire season. Like, that's pretty much the only way I can put it, and I think she deserves some respect. I think they should make her either the main villain of a Wonder Woman animated series season or just a movie. But yeah, I will say again though, I would like to see a Wonder Woman animated series, so maybe we get a season or two of that before we get a War of the Gods movie. But regardless, I'd love to see this story in live action, in animation, whatever. I think we just need some Wonder Woman content because it just doesn't seem like we're going to be getting very much of it for a little while. So next up, let's talk about the Green Lanterns, and a story that was my favorite DC Comics event as a kid, the Sinestro Corps War. So the Sinestro Corps War follows the story of Sinestro forming his own rival Lantern Corps to oppose the Green Lanterns. Sinestro was once one of the best Green Lanterns and actually mentored Hal Jordan. On his home planet Korrigar, however, he ruled as a dictator. This was eventually discovered by Hal Jordan and reported to the Guardians, who banished Sinestro from the Corps. While away from the Corps, Sinestro formed his own Lantern Corps, the Yellow Lanterns, whose ring powers come from the user's ability to invoke fear. He declared he would get revenge on the Green Lanterns for banishing him, which is exactly what he aimed to do in this story. The Sinestro Corps War is incredibly high stakes. Not only do the Green Lanterns meet their match in the Yellow Lanterns, who have a lot of ring wielders, but they're fighting an enemy led by somebody who used to be a Green Lantern. To this point in Green Lantern publication, this is the highest the stakes had ever been. Sinestro and Hal Jordan had been rivals to this point, but this was their biggest moment. I think it would be really cool to see their rivalry build up to this eventually, but considering we're getting 60-year-old actors to represent both Sinestro and Hal Jordan, I honestly don't think we're going to see it. There have been lots of rumors suggesting that Hal Jordan is going to die in the Lanterns show, with a sort of torch passing moment to John Stewart to then become the main DCU Green Lantern. If this happens, I think it makes a Sinestro Corps war story on the big screen less likely. The story of Sinestro's revenge and the Corps battling is compelling, but I feel like the biggest selling point for the story is the ultimate face-off between Sinestro and Hal Jordan. I feel like without this dynamic, it overall lessens the impact of the story, but that's just my opinion. I really do hope they keep Hal alive after the first season of Lanterns because I do think he's a cool character to have around. If they do kill him off, however, this is what I think they should do. So, if they do decide to kill off Hal Jordan, I would love to see the series Spectre, Day of Judgment get adapted to the DCU. So in the 90s, Hal Jordan turned evil. He became the main villain of the second DC crisis, 0 Hour: A Crisis in Time, and he did this because Coast City was destroyed by Mongol and Cyborg Superman, and Hal's response to the city's destruction was to try and just bring it back with his Green Lantern ring, like just will it back into existence, and the Guardians were very against that, and that really pissed Hal Jordan off, so he pretty much went completely crazy, wiped out the entire Green Lantern Corps, killed Sinestro, killed most of the Guardians. It's one of the most insane storylines in DC Comics history. But that's not the storyline I'm here to talk about. The storyline I'm here to talk about is what comes after, which is Day of Judgment. So the last time we had seen Hal Jordan was in 1996 in The Final Night, where he sacrificed himself to save the Earth. During Hal's absence, Kyle Rayner took up the mantle of Green Lantern, and Hal was thought to be a thing of the past. That was until Spectre: Day of Judgment, where a fallen angel takes takes control of the Spectre and unleashes hell on Earth. The heroes realize that the Spectre definitely needs a new human host, so they grab Hal Jordan out of hell and get him to become the new Spectre. This is a really underrated and great story from DC. This is the first time we've seen Hal since he turned evil, and you get to see him reflect on his past mistakes in the story. He also takes a new approach to the spirit of vengeance, where normally the Spectre would have no mercy on wrongdoers. Hal's time as the Spectre saw him focus on redemption rather than vengeance. I really don't want to go too far into details on this story because I know it's not nearly as well known as most of the other stories on this list, but if you haven't read it, I really think that you should check it out. It is one of my favorite DC stories ever. It's very, very underrated. If we do get some crazy heel turn from Hal in the Lanterns show where he becomes Parallax, I think it would be an awesome opportunity to showcase this very good and very underrated story on the big screen. If you haven't checked this story out, I think you should. I think it definitely is not talked about enough. So next, let's talk about my favorite Flash story of all time, The Return of Barry Allen. So this storyline was written in the late 80s by Mark Waid and was one of the first major story arcs for his run on The Flash. This story was published in 1993 and featured Wally West grappling with whether or not he could live up to Barry Allen's legacy as The Flash. Wally was Barry's sidekick up until Barry's death in the Crisis on Infinite Earths event in 1984. Following this event, Wally West became the new Flash. Even in the issues leading up to this storyline, you can tell Wally feels overwhelmed with whether or not he can live up to Barry's legacy, which is why this storyline is perfect. Out of the blue, Barry Allen shows up at the Garrick household where Jay, Joan, Wally, and Linda are having dinner. He tells Wally he doesn't remember anything and that he just showed up in a random alleyway. And I will issue a spoiler warning in case you want to read this story for yourself and you don't want to know what's really going on with Barry Allen. I will say stop watching here and I'll put his timestamp where you can keep watching. Everything is good at first. Barry returns to being the Flash alongside Wally. They fight crime together, but Wally begins realizing something is off with Barry. Eventually, Wally investigates the alleyway Barry turned up in and finds a journal. This is not the journal of Barry Allen, however, but Eobard Thawne, the Reverse Flash. It turns out that Eobard had actually gotten reconstructive surgery in the future, traveled back in time, and attempted to become the Flash of the present. However, once realizing that the Flash will eventually kill him, he attempts to destroy everything of his legacy, including killing Wally West. This leads to a final standoff between Wally and Eobard, Flash versus Reverse Flash, where Wally proves himself as the Flash, not just the sidekick. This is my favorite Flash story of all time, and if I were to pitch a Flash movie, this is what I would do. I've talked about how I do a Flash movie in the DCU before, so go check it out, but I honestly just really think it's time we see Wally West on the big screen. We've seen Barry get a massive show and his own movie at this point, and I think it's time we show Wally some love. Alright, so next let's talk about the Teen Titans, and for the Titans I chose the Judas Contract as a story I'd like to see. I will say though, kind of similarly to Brainiac, I more so picked this story because I just want to see a Titans movie with Deathstroke as the main villain, especially because there are some elements of this story that and I think most people would like to forget about. Regardless, the Judas Contract is a story about the Teen Titans adding a new member by the name of Terra, but Terra ends up being a spy for the Titans' greatest enemy, Deathstroke. Deathstroke wants to capture and kill the Titans to carry out a contract left behind by his son. Hive initially hired his son to kill the Titans, but he couldn't do it, leading to Deathstroke picking up the contract for this story. I decided to throw this one in here because there is a Teen Titans movie in development, and I would honestly like to see Deathstroke more than any other villain. We've seen a lot of the Trigon stuff, and I've never really been a huge fan of it, and I'd like the first Titans movie to be at least somewhat grounded. I would also like to see the Wolfman era Titans get some love in this adaptation, and this is arguably Wolfman's most iconic story from his run on the Teen Titans. If you want to come back in the sequel and do Trigon or Brother Blood, I'm on board with that, but to start, I'd like to see Deathstroke versus the Titans. I'm a big fan of the Bat Family in DC Comics, and I feel like no story puts the Bat Family on display better than Battle for the Cowl. So this story takes place right after Final Crisis, an event where Batman was thought to have died. With Batman leaving a major void as the protector of Gotham, a couple of Batman's former sidekicks attempt to become the next Batman. Initially, the mantle is taken up by Tim Drake, who believes Bruce wanted him to become Batman after he was gone. Soon into his stint as Batman, however, he encounters a much more violent Batman who turns out to be second Robin Jason Todd. It's kind of the usual bad guy story with Jason. He believes that criminals don't deserve a second chance and should be taken out. Tim Drake tries to reason with him, but he gets beaten nearly to death by Jason. This results in Dick Grayson being forced to take up the cape and cowl and become Batman despite not wanting to. In the end, he's able to overcome Jason and become the next Batman, taking up Damian Wayne as his Robin. Also, I will say, I think the dynamic between Dick as Batman and Damian as Robin works so well. Like, I think the pairing works better than the father and son dynamic because Damian and Bruce are pretty similar attitude-wise, and I think it's nice to mix it up a little bit with Nightwing taking over as Batman and becoming a different type of role model to Damian Wayne. I think this story would be really cool to see on the big screen because you get to see what these characters become post-Batman. That isn't something that is too commonly explored by DC nowadays, and I think people would be really excited to see who the true successor to Batman is on the big screen. I would also like for Dick Grayson to have his big moment. We get to see him built up as Nightwing in the Titans films throughout the DCU before being thrust into a major leadership role after the death of Batman. Obviously, I'd want to see this story way down the line in the DCU, but it's still a story I'd want to see nonetheless. Lastly, I wanted to make sure I included a Justice League story in here, so let's talk about the Mark Waid storyline, JLA Tower of Babel. So Tower of Babel is a Justice League story that focuses on Batman's paranoia and how it can be a huge detriment to the team. In Batman's Batcave, he held contingency plans for each Justice League member if they were to go rogue. His goal was for them to only be used during an emergency, but these plans were stolen from the Batcave by Ra's al Ghul and the League of Assassins. One by one, each League member begins to get taken out in various inexplicable ways. Eventually, they are able to overcome this, but they also realize that Batman was the one who created all of these contingency plans. This obviously does not sit well with the Justice League, and while Batman maintains he didn't mean for any of this to happen, he is voted off of the Justice League. This is a classic Justice League story, and it's actually been retold in the animated film Justice League Doom. I wasn't a huge fan of it personally, but I do know there are some people that liked it. I think this would be a great ideal second Justice League movie, maybe to weaken Earth right before Darkseid arrives. The Justice League loses their leader and best strategist, while the rest of the team is weakened as a result of the events of the film. I also think this could lead nicely into Batman forming the Outsiders. In the comics, he leaves the Justice League to form the Outsiders, which is more of a Black Ops team, and I think it could be really cool to see them on the big screen as well. Anyways, guys, those are 10 storylines that I'd like to see in the DCU. Let me know if you'd want a part 2, because there are actually plenty of storylines I could think of that I'd like to see part of the DCU. This was kind of just me throwing the first ones I could think of for each character into a video, but I could definitely make more parts to this if you guys are interested. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.